Hey everybody, welcome back to the program. Here in the Vinyl Pad, I have a very special guest, musician Richard Houghten. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Eric.
And what's cool is that not only are you a musician, but you are sort of a tradesman of sorts, where you actually cut records.
Yeah, I learned to cut records to basically put out my own music, and then when I started doing it more and more, I started doing it for other people, and then I just realized that I actually really love the process of making records.
Maybe you can explain this.
For sure.
Because certain records, it's more obvious or it's more pronounced, maybe is the better word to use. Inner groove distortion. Can you maybe distill that into terms I can understand?
Every record more or less has some degree of inner groove distortion. And so I'm pretty visual, so I didn't right away understand how inner groove distortion worked. But when a record spins, it's a spiral. And like as you were saying, it always moves the same speed. So imagine a guy walking on a record. On the outside, he's going to have to be running. Whereas in the middle, he could kind of slowly walk around. So it's like if you're running on like a treadmill on a record, you'd be like, running so fast. And I'm like, phew, I can walk. So what this gives us is if we're looking at the groove, like, okay, the spiral around here is like, I don't know how many feet, but probably like almost a couple feet or maybe more. And so that gives us like 2 feet to put grooves. And if you look at the grooves under the microscope, they're long like this, like a really nice smooth wave. Okay. Right? Like if you think about a slinky. So you're pulling a slinky out, it's going to be nice smooth waves. As you get towards the center, we're having to compress the audio into the same amount of space, literally like a lot smaller. So now the grooves are literally being smushed together. And now the problem that happens is that the needle that's going through this is getting dragged through and trying to trace. Like you can imagine like driving a car on these like a smooth road that's going up and down, and you're kind of like going like, oh, this is kind of fun. It's working. Yeah. Now, if you compressed it down and you're going in a car, like you're gonna start going like, it's like it's really difficult to get through all these grooves when they almost become steeper and close together. And so what happens is the stylus can't make the full connection in the record. It's starting to go like this, like the stylus is getting pulled through and then getting a little bit clipped at the end, in part because most likely the stylus is too big to fit into those little grooves. So what happens is like let's say you're trying to go up here, but the stylus is so thick that it goes, and it can't complete the upper part of that groove. And essentially that's what happens. And the reason that happens is like you usually hear inner distortion a little bit more on the high end, and it's because those grooves are faster and smaller. And so what happens is the groove just can't fit into those little tight spaces. And so you can get around this by like a lot of really hi-fi records are like, no, we're not going to go in that far. Right. So if you see a record that's cut all the way to the center label, you're going to lose high end significantly around the last like centimeter to 2 centimeters. And also things like cymbals and songs that are louder are going to have the same problem, because a groove that is louder is going to need more space back and forth to, it's like amplitude is essentially expressed in movement. So like a quiet groove is going to be like a lot smaller. Oh, sure. And then a louder groove is going to be a lot bigger. Essentially a groove is a replication of a back and forth speaker movement dragged through like space or like onto the disc. What happens is the grooves get compressed towards the middle because there's not as much space to express the groove. And when the grooves get compressed, the needle can't trace the groove as well, and then it is lost.
Is there a way to give that last track a little bit more, like each groove a little bit more space?
Let's say we have 20 minutes of material, and we cut it with the grooves spaced out quite a bit. It's going to end up much further in to the middle at the end of the record. But let's say we look under the microscope, we're like, oh, we can pull the grooves a little bit tighter so they're barely touching. And then we're going to get the 18-minute, 20-minute side a little bit closer. You know, that's the best way to do it. But so yeah, the inherent problem with a record is actually that the fidelity is best on the outside, and just no matter what is going to be less on the inside. One fun way to do it is to imagine your whole album going like, okay, we're going to put the loudest songs at the very beginning, the songs with the brightest like cymbal crashes and things like that, and then maybe like a slower ballad on the very last song that doesn't need to express as much like extreme dynamics or high-end frequencies. Yeah. One way I like to think about it is like when we're cutting away a record, it's pulling off a piece of the record, like a thread. And so you could technically just take that thread out and stretch it like, I don't even know, a quarter of a mile, right? And that's like the physical representation of the music. And so like if you could imagine that thread just being like the first part of it just big waves, and then at the end it's just this like frizzly little like you know, and then that's what's happening is that towards the end the grooves are getting closer and closer and closer and closer together. They're getting like crunched together, and then the stylist is just like, oh, I can't go through these quick enough, you know, and then also I can't fit through it. So they say, and I say they, I mean this is what I read, is that if they could make a stylus that was good enough, you would really be able to overcome intergroove distortion a lot more. But because the radius of the tip is bigger than the length of the groove, it can't fit into the groove anymore because it's so compressed. So, yeah.
Yeah, and that gets into like shapes
too.
Yeah,
totally.
And
shapes and
then there's pros and cons for each shape, and there's some high-end shapes, but they, you know, you have to change them more frequently. And thank you for coming by.
Yeah,
appreciate
thank you.
it. Yeah, and been such an education as well.
Cool. I hope I made some bit of sense.
Oh, absolutely.
Cool.
Totally. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you,
so
Eric.
much.